Hey everyone, this is Avish Parashar, and welcome to my improv mini show here on Wednesday, April 30th. No, April 29th. I am so discombobulated. If you have not seen my last mini show, here's what's going to happen right now. I'm going to play 3 improv games for you. But for each one, I'm also going to add in some instruction. Everything I do as a speaker is about taking ideas from the world of improv comedy and drawing out lessons from them to business and life. So that's what I'm going to do here in this format. So to begin, and I'm just going to pull up my little other screen here so I can see what's going on here. All right. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do 3 improv games, and this is a theme here today. So today's theme is going to be around the idea of saying yes and instead of yes but. To say yes and instead of yes but. It's a foundational improv comedy idea. It's one I talk about in all of my keynotes, and it's one that I've written a book on, which if I was a better marketer, I would have had a copy here, but I, of course, forgot to bring that out before I started. I've written a book on it. It's a very powerful idea. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to play 3 improv comedy games that demonstrate different facets of it. One is going to be one to demonstrate just how one uses yes and then I'm going to do 2 improv games for areas you can apply yes and to. If you are watching live and you want to add into the chat, there are going to be times I'm going to be looking for some suggestions. What I'm going to be looking for, and I'm going to write this in the comment box so people who come on can add. For the games, I'm going to be looking for a challenge that you are facing right now, or anyone could be facing, not you, biz or life, not virus related. Don't want things to hit too close to home right now. Second suggestion you can put in the box is some kind of physical hobby or activity. And number 3 is some kind of occupation. These are the ones I'm going to use in my improv games. I'm going to give people a chance to enter them in advance as opposed to there. So you can see with my typos, these are the suggestions you can put in the box at any point to me trying to get you to do it right when I get started. So just for context, the idea of saying yes and instead of yes but. It's a real simple improv thing. One of the first things you learn, if I was doing an improv scene with somebody else, I always want to come from a place of saying yes and to them. And just because anyone watching, are you getting this weird stuttering? Like every 10 seconds I get this flash on my end. So hopefully it's coming through there normal. Not sure what to do about that, so I'm just going to keep on rolling. So the idea of yes and versus yes but is real simple. If I'm doing a scene with a partner and they say something to me at the most fundamental level, I want to accept that reality. So if they come to me and say, hey, Dad, I'm going to say, I'm not going to say, yeah, but I'm not your father. I'm going to say, yes, son, I am your father, and let me take you to school this morning, or whatever the topic is. So it's about accepting your partner's reality. So it's yes and versus yes but. And yes but is an idea in improv that's very much around called blocking. It's like I'm blocking what you want to do. So we're going to say yes and. Now, off stage, this becomes an incredibly powerful idea because when you're communicating with somebody else, you're going to want to say, our natural response is to say yes, but to them. So let me give you a quick example. This is not really one of the 3 games I'm going to play. It's just an example. Let's say that I was trying to plan a vacation with a partner. And we're going to improvise this, but we're going to make suggestions. So, and I'm going to kind of move back and forth to do the different parts. And the first time, every sentence is going to start with yes, but. So, hey, I think we should go to the mountains. Yes, but I really want to go to the beach. Yeah, but the beach is too hot. I get sunburned. Let's go to the mountains. Yeah, but the mountains are cold and it's summer. I want to be in the sun where there's water. Yes, but last time we went to the beach, it was too crowded. Yes, but when we went to the mountains, we were attacked by a bear. And so we go back and forth saying yes, but, just arguing. So it doesn't get anywhere. It feels negative and stops progress. If instead we want to have that same conversation with a yes and, it would look like, hey, let's do this vacation in the mountains. Yes, and if we go to this one specific mountain, there's a great lake there, so I can enjoy the water sports I like to do. Yes, and when we're up in the mountains, there's this great new restaurant we can try we'll really enjoy. Yes, and we can find some green out there, some glades, and maybe I can go lie in the sun and work on my tan while we're there. Yes, and so on and so on. So you see, the second way, the plan is developed, we keep making progress, and it feels very positive. So that's a real simple example of the difference between yes and yes but. So if we want to implement that in the real world, it really comes back to shifting our default response from yes but when someone says something we don't like, a suggestion they're coming to with us that maybe is not what we originally intended, or very much so when they are being critical, when they're giving us feedback or something makes us defensive, we respond with a yes but. Now, if you go to my website, dinghappens.com, I got more videos on this. I'm not going to go super in depth. And obviously, plug, I wrote a book called Say Yes And. But I'm going to share with you 3 ways. That's the simplest idea. It's the most powerful one of the ideas I talk about that audiences apply off stage. But I'm going to play an improv game to demonstrate the idea of yes and without playing yes and specifically. Because at its heart, what yes and is really saying 2 things: accept and advance. It's an idea of accepting and advancing. What that means is when something happens, someone talks to me, gives me a suggestion, whatever, I'm going to accept what they've said and I'm going to advance it. I'm going to build off of it, as opposed to pushing them down, saying my reasoning, coming up with my counterpoint. I'm going to accept the reality and build off of it. I'm going to use that in an improv game. I'm going to explain the game, but again, this is the first one I'm going to play. And what I'd like is a suggestion. So if you're watching this and you want to put in the chat box a suggestion of some kind of challenge you might face or anyone might face. It doesn't have to be real. A life challenge, a business challenge, just nothing virus or pandemic related. I don't want to tie into that right now. And I'm going to use that for a game that I'm going to play called Best of Times, Worst of Times. Now, the way this is going to work is I'm going to start telling you a story. And periodically, I'm going to ring a bell and call out best of times or worst of times. And they're alternate. When I say best of times, whatever happens in the story has to be very positive. No matter what it was, it has to be great. It's the best thing that happened. But then I'm going to immediately change the worst of times, at which point everything that happens has to be bad. So, oh my God, this is terrible for whatever reason. And then I have to justify why those changes are happening. So it's a silly little thing, but we're going to play around with that. And then I'm going to show how this demonstrates the idea of yes and accept in advance, and then how you can use that to get through the current situation and deal with other challenges. So I'm going to start a challenge. If I get one in the chat box, I'll use that. Otherwise, I'll just make up a challenge myself. All right, I'll come up with a challenge that I'm going to tell a story about a person who is getting fired from their job. And then it's going to go best of times, worst of times. Even better. All right, so annoying patients who don't want to pay. So patients, clients, let's say you got a doctor and you got a patient who doesn't want to pay. So I'm going to tell a story about that. I'm going to switch best of times, worst of times, and explain what we can take away from that. All right, here we go. Once upon a time, there was a doctor named Sheila, and she was a great doctor in town, but she had a problem. Many of her patients didn't want to pay, and she was kind of running out of money. Best of times. Now, this was really good for her in that moment because she was going through a divorce, and if she could show her income was lower, she'd be able to collect a lot more money from the alimony, and then when she made more money, she'd be like double dipping. Unfortunately, the judge found out about this plan and realized that she was letting her business slack on purpose, and he got very upset. So not only did he rule against her, but he forced her to pay alimony to her now ex-husband. Best of times. Well, this was great for her in this moment because she actually didn't want to get divorced. And so by paying him money, she was not forced to interact with him more, and he was forced to interact with her. So she really patched this scheme where she would pay him alimony in person, and then he would start to fall back in love with her. Worst of times. The problem was the first time she went to meet him in person, he didn't come. He sent his lawyer. See, he hated her so much. He wanted to have nothing to do with her. And this lawyer was so mean that he not only would just take the money and not let her interact, but he was now representing all of her patients, saying they were not going to pay. Best of times. Now, this is great because a class action lawsuit means all of her patients were in one place. Instead of her having to go after each person individually, she could sue them all at once. It really saved her a ton of time. Worst of times. But it was really bad because when she went to court, she ended up with that same judge who was so upset at her in the first place that she wasn't going to pay. All right, I'm going to stop right there. Story kind of tailors off. So that's an example of best of times, worst of times. Now that is an example of yes and accepting advancing, because when you are playing that game, when the bell rings and you have to switch from best or worst, the accepting number one is you have to immediately accept that the story has changed. I might have been moving in a really cool direction about best of times and things are good. And maybe I was even building up to something. But when you switch to worst of times, I have to accept. What some people will do is they will finish their thought. They will keep going with the best of time as they slowly transition to the worst of time. Now, really what they're saying is that I don't want to accept this reality. I'm going to kind of wait and then deal with it. So number one, you have to accept. Number two, you have to advance. That's the and part of yes and. So whenever that story changed, the tendency is to want to let go of everything that you just did in the good so you can make it bad. Or to let go of everything you did in the bad to make it good. To completely change the story. And that's weak. That makes it sound disjointed. It doesn't go anywhere. What you want to do is advance, so build off of. So what I try to do when I play that game is immediately switch to best and worst. But the thought process is, how can I make what just happened bad? Or how can I make just what happened good? To advance off of it. So instead of it being, suddenly she had to pay her husband alimony, ding, best of times, but that didn't matter because she met a new man. Now that didn't matter, it sticks to the letter of the law of the game, which is best of times, but it doesn't really advance. By saying, how does paying the husband alimony make the story best? I said, oh, because she wanted to get back together with him at force of contact. So that, if I'm working with an improv partner, that's how I'm a good teammate and partner, by accepting what they say and advancing. When we want to use this off stage, when we're dealing with change, responding to the unexpected, going through something like this now, this is the critical mindset to use yes and. Number one, we have to accept the yes and. In this situation right now with the pandemic, the lockdown, some people still aren't really accepting that it's changed. Obviously, they've accepted it in that they're staying in, although some people aren't. But they're maybe following the rule, the letter of the law, like in that game, but mentally, they're still holding on to, I wish things were like they were, or I can't wait till they get back. Not accepting the new reality. And then advancing. Too many people aren't advancing, building off of the new reality. Instead, they are wishing things could be different, trying just to get through it, really essentially saying yes, but. Like, yes, this is the new reality, but I wish it wasn't the case. So accept and advance. Take a look at whatever change you're dealing with. It could be the pandemic, it could be anything, any change, any challenge. Are you accepting the reality and then advancing forward, or are you yes butting, not accepting it, and trying to stay where you are? And so that's the general idea of yes and how it applies in an improv context and a life context with accept and advance. Now I want to share two areas you can directly apply the yes and idea. And, obviously it's communication is where a lot of people do it, right? Accepting the change, accepting what my partner said. But I'm going to give you two other places you can apply it, or two ways to apply it, that are going to make a big difference, whether it's dealing with change or advancing our goals or whatever it is. The first is to yes and, what I'm going to say, it's going to sound grandiose, but it's not. Yes and the impossible. And what I mean by that is there are things, activities you think about doing, goals you think about pursuing, ways you think about pursuing those goals. And when you think about them, your mind immediately says, yes, but. Yes, but it's not possible. Yes, but I can't do that. Yes, but it's too hard. It's too expensive. Whatever. I call these persistent yes, buts. There's something your idea keeps giving you that you keep saying yes, but to. That may be the very thing that when you say yes and to it, it'll make everything change. So what I'm going to do right now is, and if you saw my one last week, my first mini show, this is my second, you may have heard me say that with these 3-game mini shows, I'm going to try to make the second game one that I'm really not sure if it's going to work. It's a bit of a challenge. And here it fits in really well with the theme, because I'm going to play a game for you that normally would require an audience, is usually played with 2 or 3 performers, not just one, and requires a lot of physical motion and space to work. So I'm going to try it, and we're going to see how that goes, and we'll take it from there. This is a game called Countdown. Now, in order to play this, if anyone in the chat box wants to write in a physical activity or hobby, I'm going to use that as the basis for the suggestion. Anything that has like a physical component, because I'm going to demonstrate. What I'm going to do is demonstrate a lecture. But what I have here is my phone timer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a 1-minute lecture on this hobby or activity, showing you how you can do it. But the game is called Countdown because what's going to happen is after I do the 1-minute version, I'm going to repeat it in smaller and smaller chunks of time. And then I'll explain why this game is normally done physically, and how that all works and how I can make this work in this case. Okay, so All right, we got a suggestion here called dancing, which is very physical, and I got limited space. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to lecture you for the key elements to be successful at dancing in 1 minute. When the timer goes off, wherever I got to stop, and then I'll replay it, and we'll see what happens. And go. Hey, thank you for joining me here for my talk on how to be a successful dancer. Now, there are 3 things you must remember if you want to be very successful as a dancer. Number 1 is you have to stretch. You get injured very easily, and people don't stretch the upper body enough. We assume that we got to stretch the lower body, which makes sense. But your upper body, the rotator cuff, is where most people hurt. So do the double wrap stretch to really stretch out your shoulders. Otherwise, you'll be out of commission for a long time. Number 2 is you need to dance from the inside, right? You got to feel the heart in and let it out. In fact, if you don't feel like your heart is exploding out of you, you're doing it wrong. It's not about technique, it's about feeling. I flail around like an idiot, but people love my dancing because it's from the heart. And number 3, you got to find the right music, right? You can do like the hip hop thing, you can do the country twang, or you can do like Indian Bharatanatyam dancing. Whatever you do, but it's got to be the music that makes you explode. So in summary, number 1, stretch. Number 2, dance from your heart. And number 3, find the right kind of music that taps into your heart. All right, that's the 1 minute timer. Now, that's a little ridiculous, and you may have found that mildly entertaining. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to replay that lecture. So I'm going to give you the same points and the same techniques, but this time in 30 seconds. I'm cutting the time in half, but I'm going to do the same lecture here. All right, here we go. Thank you for joining me for my talk on how to be a great dancer. There are really 3 key things you must remember. Number 1, you got to stretch. Most people stretch the legs, but that's not enough. It's the upper body where most injuries happen. So do the big hug stretch and see how that goes. Number 2, you got to really get it from your heart. You got to express how you're doing. And if you're not feeling like you're exploding your heart, you're doing it wrong. And number 3, find the right kind of music. It could be kind of Cabbage Patch hip hop. It could be country dancing. Could be Bharatanatyam, whatever. So in summary, stretch, right music, and explode from your heart. And that's 30 seconds. Okay? Truly ridiculous. But I think I can do that faster. So now I'm going to cut that time down to 15 seconds and see how that goes. So half the time, same content, same key points in 15 seconds. Ready? Here we go. All right, there are 3 things you need to do to be a great dancer. Number 1, stretch, not just the legs, but the hug stretch. Number 2 is you got to find them. You got to dance from your heart, not just from technique. Number 3, find the right music. It could be Cabbage Patch, could be Bharatanatyam, whatever it is, do it right. So hug, stretch, and right music. And that's the time. Okay. Now, that was pretty fast, and that was 15 seconds. I'm going to do that one more time, but this time I'm going to cut the time down again, not in half, but by a third. So instead of 7.5 seconds, I'm going to do the whole lecture, the key points, in 5 seconds. Okay? Here we go. To be a dancer, number 1, hug stretch. Number 2 is blow from your heart. And number 3, right music. 5 seconds. Okay. So that is a silly game. It's a very high energy game, and it's a game that normally you kind of run around the stage being crazy, and then it gets more and more energetic. We used to use that game. It was so high energy and so fun that we would use that game to end shows. Now, the reason I do it here is there's 2 reasons. Number 1 is because, like I said, it's a challenge. When I first started thinking about doing games, even when I thought about doing games in person but solo, this is one I always wanted to play, but I was like, how am I going to do that solo? Number 2, virtual, I'm like, it's impossible. Literally, I will throw myself across a stage or run or jump, because when you get it down and down and down in time, all that physical activity just makes the energy go through the roof and really increases the humor. So how can I do that virtually? So that's the challenge. There's another reason, which is about distilling down to the core, but that's going to tie into my 3rd game and 3rd point, so I'll talk about that later. But what I found is, by tapping my creativity, when I said yes and, instead of yeah, but I can't do this game, even though I love it and it pleases the audience, I can't do it virtually, I wasn't getting anywhere. Oops, well, when I switched to saying yes and, how can I make that work? Well, what's interesting is your mind answers questions you pose it. When I take a goal that's impossible, or a persistent yes but, when my mind keeps telling me, can you do countdown? Can you find a way of doing it? And I keep saying yes but. When I change the question, when I say yes and, how can I do it? It forces my creativity down the path. Now, when I figured it out here, right, this is how I chose to do it. I get an activity. Dancing would have been so much fun to do live on stage because I could really get into it and move around a lot. But I had to modify, right? I lifted my leg up. I did a hug stretch instead of another kind of stretch, right? Whatever it is, you have to find a way around it. But I'll tell you, if you want to innovate, if you want to make progress on goals where you have been stuck on, if you want to solve persistent problems, looking at your persistent yes, but saying yes and to them, even if your immediate response is, I can't do that, and then using your creativity, coming up with ideas and trying them is the way to advance, innovate, and make progress while others are stuck staying behind. So whether it's right now while you're in lockdown, everything is different, or it could be in any other area of your life when we're out of lockdown, when the world is back to whatever normal is, pay attention. What's that thing your mind keeps giving you and you keep saying yes but to? And just watch how things can change when you find ways of saying yes and to it. Figure it out. That's how we innovate and move forward while everyone else gets stuck. All right. So that's the idea of saying yes and to a persistent yes but, or yes and to something you currently think is impossible, but that you want to. And real quick, the reason it's persistent yes buts is if your mind keeps giving you that idea, that means your mind thinks there's merit to it, right? If your mind just gave you an idea that wouldn't work and you said yes but to it, your mind wouldn't give it to you again if it's not really valid. But if there's meat there, it's going to keep coming back. All right, the third point, the second thing to say yes and to is say yes and to the core. In every activity, in every endeavor, in every area of our lives, there are a few core things that really matter. And what we get in trouble with is when we start saying yes but to the core and saying yes and to all the distractions. Now, I said that countdown game would tie into this because the way that countdown game works is every time the time diminished, I had to remove things from it, right? What some people will do is when the time gets cut is they try to say all the same words, try to do all the same activities in that shorter and shorter time frame. But then it becomes a cacophony, nothing makes sense, and there's going to blah, blah, blah. And you might be able to get away with that with the 30 seconds because in the 1 minute version, there's a lot of dead time and fluff. But when you get down to 15 and 5 seconds, you can't do it that way. What you need to do is quickly assess what's the core. What are the few key things I need to say and do? Number one, to get the point across, and number two, to get the laughs. So in the 15-second version, I did the legs because that motion helps, right? In the 5-second version, I cut that, right? I did the hug stretch, I did the exploding, and I did the dancing, and that was it. So we distill that 1 minute thing down. What's the 5 most important seconds? In the same way, you can distill down whatever you have going on. And by focusing on those things, we make much faster progress. We're much more efficient. We waste less time, and we stay very focused. So I'm going to do one more improv game that demonstrates this idea of understanding and focusing on core elements. This is going to be a storytelling game where I'm going to tell you a story. And if you're watching, if you want to throw in the chat box a suggestion for this, any kind of occupation. I like random occupations, like not one you hear about every day. But if you want to throw an occupation in there, if I get a suggestion, I'll take it. If not, I'll just come up with one. So while I'm explaining the game, go ahead and put a suggestion in the chat box for an occupation type of job. I have here a bowl with a bunch of paper slips, and on these slips are written different, I don't know if you can read that or not, theatrical genres. So spy, epic fantasy, historical, storytelling genres. I'm going to start telling a story, and periodically I'm going to pull out a slip and read the genre that's written on there. And then the story is going to have to change. No matter what's happened before, the story will have to take on that genre. Now, just like the first exercise I did with accept in advance, best of times, worst of times, I'm going to have to not leave everything behind, but I'm going to start telling the story in that new genre. So, all right, I need a type of job. I will just pick one for this exercise. So I'm going to go with, what's something a bit random? All right, cool. Thank you very much. I appreciate you participating so much. This is my sister giving great suggestions. Thank you for being on and helping out. I truly appreciate that. So the suggestion is going to be circus performer. I'm going to tell a story about a circus performer, but then the genre is going to change every, 10 to 30 seconds. I'll go through a few genres. Like many of these things, the story may not end. I might just stop it. But then I'll explain how that ties into the idea of core elements. So here we go. Once upon a time, there was a guy, his name was Joe, and he was a circus performer. He was a clown in the circus, and he was one of 5. But deep down, he felt he was the best clown, and he really wanted to stand out. So one night, right before the show, he looked himself, and he made a decision. Military. He said, I am going to take over this circus by force. I'm done performing well and trying to get people to understand me. So what he did is that night before the show, he went out and he planted plants all around. He was basically creating a flanking maneuver around. And when all the other clowns went out, other audience members came running out, grabbed those clowns and took them out. And now he had a clear path to perform by himself. Epic fantasy. And he stood up there and he was just about to start his clown act when all of a sudden from the back of the audience there was a mighty roar and a dragon came into the circus. And the clown saw this dragon and he was like, he had this sudden flashback to a dream he had the night before. He dreamed a dragon would come to destroy the world and he would use his clowning to stop that dragon. And he alone is the clown who could stop it. So the dragon swooped down to attack him and the clown pulled off his big shoe and whacked the dragon in the head with it. Well, the dragon, action movie, the dragon just got more angry by this and reared back and went into a martial arts pose. The dragon didn't try to burn him. In fact, the dragon started doing karate. Now, the clown didn't know karate, but what he did have was all his clown accoutrement. So he took the flower which shoots water and shot water right in the clown's face, right in the dragon's face. And the dragon fell backwards and just let out a mighty roar. And the clown at this moment took off the red nose and shoved it on the dragon's mouth, which pinned the mouth closed like a muzzle. Science fiction. Well, the dragon suddenly, because the water in the eyes, the muzzle in the face started fritzing and burning and all of a sudden just sparked and just died. And the clown realized, oh my God, this was a robot. This wasn't a real dragon. And then there was a laugh coming from the back. It was the ringmaster of the circus laughing, saying, ha, 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 yes, you have found my robot clown. You have found my robot dragon. This circus was just a front for me to develop a whole robot army. In fact, you are the only living being in this circus. They're all robots. And now I'm going to replace you and turn you into a robot. And then my circus will go out and take over the world like Westworld. Well, the clown, romance, looked at the ringmaster in a new way. He had always had a crush on the ringmaster, but he had always felt the ringmaster thought too small. And now that the ringmaster was out there making plans to dominate the world, he realized, oh no, this is an ambitious man. This man does have goals. And rather than being afraid, he went over, looked the ringmaster in the eyes and said, will you marry me and let me join you on this journey? And the ringmaster said yes, and they lived happily ever after, taking over the world. All right, so that is a ridiculous story. And there's the example of this storytelling genre game. Now, the reason I use that to talk about demonstrating the core is because the way that game works is when I switch genre, I don't need to be an expert in the genre. All I really need to do is understand what are the few key core elements of that genre that make it that genre. So, for example, Western. I don't know if you can see this, but Western. Well, I don't need to know every Western. I don't need to be well versed. What I need to know is what's enough. What are some core elements I can put in the story to make it Western? Well, if I was doing Western, there'd probably be a shootout, high noon type shootout. I'd probably do something with like bandits invading a town, the lone gunman type thing. If I threw in those few elements, it would be enough, right? So in this story, the clown, if it was Western, all of a sudden, maybe the clown and dragon would have an honorable draw, right? Let's take another one. Let's say spy. If I had pulled spy genre, well, what does spy have? Well, usually it's bigger picture plots. Governments are involved, espionage. Usually there's a love interest, like someone's betraying, stabbing them in the back. So I don't need to be an expert on everything. I just need to know a few key elements. And by focusing on those, I can play that game by immediately going in with the next elements. That's all I did here, is when I pulled a new genre, I just pulled the first thought I had that's a core element of that genre. Epic fantasy. What's the first element of epic fantasy? Well, dragons. Boom, there's a dragon in the back, all right? Science fiction. Robots. All right, the dragon's a robot. So what does this mean for you? Oh, sometimes when I do this with an audience, I get genres from the group. And sometimes they'll say a genre that's either not real or one I'm not familiar with. Like they might yell, neo-Italian opera. Well, I don't know what that is, but I don't have to know what that is, if it's real or not. I just need to think, what's the first thought that comes to my mind that would be the core? Well, neo means new, Italian opera. So if I just sang, it would work, right? And so it's not about having the whole thing right. It's about identifying core elements. Now, how does this work for you off stage? Well, on the macro side, in the big picture things you're doing, whether you're running a business, have a job, in your relationships, in your creative endeavors, it's easy to get overwhelmed with details and bogged down. This is the 80-20 rule. If you look at things, there's probably a few core elements that if you really, really focus on those things, it's going to grow your business. It's going to improve your career. It's going to improve your relationship. But it's so much easier to say yes, but, because the core stuff is bigger and a little bit harder. It's easy to say yes, but to the core and say yes, and to the little details. Say yes, and to those core elements. But you can also do this on a micro level, on a small day-to-day activity level, whether it's a hobby you're engaged in, something you're doing right now, a marketing campaign, a house project, a date night, right? You don't need to worry. It's not that you don't need to worry about all the details. Sometimes the devil's in the details. Those things can matter. But focusing on the details before you've identified and focused on the core is a wasted effort. You spin your wheels, you put more energy in than you need to, you get less results. And this, to me, if you're like me, I got a lot of speaker friends who don't have kids. They're grown. They got their own businesses, and they're not loving this time because it's tough being at home, but they're being so productive, right? Because they're like, oh, I got all this time. I'm working on that new book. I'm developing new material. Me, I got 2 kids at home. I got less time than I ever have before because I'm taking my breaks. I'm trying to help. They're around all day. So I'm working less. And my head is exploding. I got to keep doing some of the stuff I was doing before, the marketing. I'm trying to do this new stuff. If I tried to do everything, I would get nowhere. So I'm just trying to focus on what are the few key core elements. For me, performing improv, showing how people can take away ideas from that and apply them, that's my core. And so that's why I'm doing these mini shows. And that's why I'm doing a few of the other things. It's a minimal amount of time. Instead of me working on a book, which takes hours and hours and months, I can do videos, I can do shows, I can do performances. It's very directly aligned with my core. It's getting the word out there, and it's letting me innovate in a new way, kind of going back to the challenge. So ask yourself that question, especially if you're struggling and feeling overwhelmed. Say yes and to the few key core elements, right? The countdown where you distill it down, the genres where by understanding and identifying those core, you can keep things moving forward. Focus on those and watch your progress improve, your stress decrease, and your productivity go up. All right, that's about half hour. Those are my 3 games. Thank you so much for joining me for my improv comedy mini show. I am planning on doing about 1 of these a week. So in the chat, in the comments below this, what I will do is write a link. I have an email list where each week I'm going to send out notifications of the various virtual things I'm doing. So if you want to be notified instead of just relying on seeing it by chance on Facebook, go to that URL, write your name and email. You'll get the email notifying you of that. Like my, you're probably already Facebook friends with me if you're seeing this, but if not, send me a friend request. Like my Facebook page. And if there's any comments or questions you have about anything around improv comedy, anything about applying, dealing with change, I may use that. I'm going to try to have a theme each week and for each show. But again, thank you very much for watching. Thank you especially to my sister for participating and giving me suggestions. That was awesome. And so connect with me online, and I look forward to seeing you, or at least being seen by you, at our next improv comedy or Soloprov virtual improv show. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful week. Stay safe, stay inside, and let's get through this.